I've been a long-haul trucker for a long time. I've seen a lot. But a few years ago, I had an experience that I'm still trying to understand, to come to terms with. This is the story of one night where the road presented a mystery that still haunts my dreams and makes me question the very fabric of reality. That night, I was up against a tight deadline. Not that that was anything new. I pulled my rig into a dimly lit parking lot, the neon sign above spelling out Ruby's Diner. A perfect stop for a break and maybe a quick bite to eat. As I walked in, the scent of burnt coffee and frying grease hit me, a familiar scent that felt oddly comforting. The diner had that retro look, red booths, checkered floor, a jukebox in the corner playing the same old rock number. A handful of local folks, heads buried in their meals or newspapers, hardly gave me a glance. I took a seat by the window, pulling out my phone. With a few taps, Google Maps came to life. There's gotta be a quicker way, I murmured to myself, zooming in on the various roads. A thin gray line, seemingly a shortcut through the dense woods, caught my eye. "Hey there," a soft voice interrupted my thoughts. I looked up into the eyes of the waitress, a brunette probably in her late 20s, wearing a name tag that read Mara. "What can I get you?" she asked. Just coffee. And a slice of apple pie," I replied, pointing to the dessert display. She scribbled down my order, but her eyes lingered on my phone screen. "You thinking of taking that road?" She nodded towards the shortcut that I'd been inspecting. "Yeah, it seems quicker," I said, trying to gauge her reaction. She hesitated, biting her lip, then said in a low voice, "Locals don't really use it, especially not after dark." I raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Why's that?" She glanced around nervously, as if afraid someone might overhear. "It's just old tales. It's silly, I know, but..." She trailed off, a distant look in her eyes. Before I could press further, she seemed to shake off her unease and said, "I'll get your coffee and pie." With a swift turn, she left, her demeanor suddenly much colder than before. I stared back at the map, pondering her words. It was an odd reaction, I thought. It seemed like it might actually take several hours off of my trip. I decided that I would risk the route. A few minutes went by and she brought the coffee and pie and I scarfed it down. It was really good and I made a note to stop here again the next time that I was in these parts. I tossed a couple of bills on the counter, grabbed my jacket, and I headed for the exit. But as I neared the door, a deep voice came from behind me. "You're not really thinking of going down that road, are you?" I turned to see an older man, leathered skin and piercing blue eyes, sitting at a corner booth. There was an air of authority about him. I paused, curiosity getting the better of me. "Why?" I asked. He beckoned me over, and as I hesitated, a younger man sitting opposite him gestured for me to sit. I could now feel the weight of the entire diner's eyes on me, the murmur of conversations dying down. Something told me that they were all privy to whatever secrets this road held. The older man leaned in as though to share some great confidential matter. "That road ain't just a shortcut. That's the fog walker's territory." I scoffed lightly. The fog walker? Is that some sort of local ghost story to scare kids?" The younger man chuckled, but his laughter lacked warmth. "You could say that, except some of us have seen it. After dark, when the fog rolls in, strange things happen." The woman sitting at the next table chimed in, her voice shaky. My brother Joe went down that road. He said he saw someone walking in the fog, but they weren't human. Their feet never touched the ground. Joe came back, but different. Terrified at even the slightest mist. Another man, probably in his 50s, added, "My truck broke down there once. Felt like someone was watching me the whole time. Heard whispers. Just when I was about to lose it, dawn broke and I got out of there." I looked around the diner. The faces staring back at me held a mix of fear, concern, and the weariness of those who had seen too much. "Look," the old man said, placing a weathered hand on mine. "We don't tell you this to scare you off. It's just a friendly warning. You seem like a decent fellow. Don't tempt fate." I sat there for a moment, taking it all in. The ambience of the diner, the hushed conversations, the weight of 1,000 unsaid words. I had a hard time believing what they were saying. It was all a joke, but something about the way that they all looked and that everyone in the place was suddenly so serious, so much in agreement. Well, it seemed impossible that so many people would be playing a joke. I thanked them for the warning, and I headed out to the truck. Their warning was, well, unsettling, but also unbelievable. As unlikely as it was, it had to be a joke, and I had a deadline. Yeah, I had a deadline, and I wasn't going to be tricked into taking a clear shortcut by a group of locals just wanting to play a trick on me. I was going to take that route. I swung the truck's door open, I climbed in, and I shifted into gear. The comforting familiarity of the dashboard, the soft glow of the dials, all of it felt like home. The open road ahead beckoned, but now it had an added allure of the forbidden, the mystique of the unknown. As the diner's lights faded in my rearview mirror, I tried to convince myself that I was making the right choice. The farther I drove from the diner, the more the afternoon sun dipped, casting long shadows across the landscape. Those stories, they were merely folk tales. It was hard to believe anything sinister lurked in these parts, especially with the golden sun rays streaming through the trees. Yet, as I approached the entrance to the forested shortcut, there was a noticeable shift. The road, once surrounded by opened fields, was now flanked by tall trees, their branches arching overhead. The soft chirping of the last birds filled the still air, as if saying goodbye to the day. As I pulled onto the road, I thought of the waitress, her pale face, the almost imperceptible tremble in her voice. Then the old man, the conviction in his eyes. But it was the younger man's story, the way that he laughed without mirth, that lingered. For a moment, my resolve wavered. Still, time was money, and as the moments passed by, money was what seemed to be slipping away. Logic battled superstition, skepticism wrestled with gut instinct. But in the end, the pull of the looming deadline was too strong. I couldn't afford the luxury of detours or lengthy roads, not tonight. I had chosen this path and there was no turning back. So, pushing aside the whispers of caution, I revved the engine a bit, straightening up. "Just a bunch of stupid legends," I mumbled, my voice almost drowned out by the hum of the engine. I've got a schedule to keep. The thickening woods on either side of the highway were all I had for company. I flipped on the radio and I drove on. The sun set and the night fell. At first, the moon and stars offered their glow, painting silvery streaks on the asphalt and guiding me onward. It was beautiful, almost poetic, the way that they peeked through the ever-thickening canopy. But as I ventured deeper, the world grew darker. The canopy overhead became a solid, impenetrable mass, shielding out the celestial lights and wrapping my world in shadows. I clicked on the headlights, the beams cutting through the darkness, but not quite reaching the depths of the forest around me. And then, as if the stories of the diner folk had conjured it, a creeping fog began its ascent. It was subtle at first, merely a mist that hovered at the edges of the trees. But within minutes, the fog thickening and slithering across the road swallowed the beams of my headlights. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. A logical part of me knew that the fog was natural, especially in forested areas at dusk. But after what I had heard in the diner, well, I felt in the back of my mind that this wasn't just a fog. It felt alive, like it was watching, waiting. It was like the forest had eyes. The road before me became increasingly elusive, the fog playing tricks with my vision. Every so often, I would think that I saw a shape, a movement to my side, but when I would turn, it was just mist and shadow, flying past in a blur. "You're letting the stories get to you," I whispered to myself, adjusting the radio to fill the cab with some distracting tunes. I continued my drive. The fog grew thicker with each passing minute, weaving an opaque veil around my truck. It felt suffocating. The path ahead became nothing but a dim blur, forcing me to squint and strain my eyes just to keep the rig on the road. Amidst the blanket of fog, the radio's static grew louder. It buzzed and hissed until there was no music. I reached to turn it off, hoping to rid myself of the aggravating noise. But as I did, the static subsided for just a second, replaced by a faint whisper, indistinct and ethereal. I froze, my hand on the dial. The voice, if that's what it was, seemed lost, trapped somewhere between the frequencies. I strained my ears, trying to pick up on any recognizable words, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared, leaving me questioning whether I had even heard it at all. I turned off the radio. Suddenly, something darted across the edge of my headlights, a fleeting shadow that just vanished into the encompassing fog. My heart raced. It must have been an animal, or perhaps it was just a trick of the light and the fog playing on my nerves. I tried to shake off my unease. "It's just your mind playing tricks on you, Dale," I murmured, my own voice sounding foreign in the hushed space of the cab. But the discomfort gnawed at me. Those stories from the diner began to replay in my mind. The warnings, the legend, whatever. And the way that the waitress's eyes had flickered with genuine concern. The logical part of me kept trying to push those thoughts aside, to convince myself that it was all just coincidental or the product of an overactive imagination. Yet as I drove through the ever-thickening fog, I couldn't help but regret not taking the long way around. Every nerve in my body screamed that I was not alone on this road. But the road was narrow, and there was no way I could turn around now. So onward I went. Then an icy chill settled in. It was unnatural, and it made the inside of the cab feel like a freezer. I shivered, reaching to crank up the heater. But as I turned the dial, a jolt ran through the truck. The dashboard lights flickered, the gauges went haywire, and the engine sputtered. "Come on, girl," I muttered to the old rig, patting the dashboard as if to soothe the spooked horse. But the truck only responded with a series of sickly coughs before it let out one final groan and died completely. Silence. The thick fog outside seemed to seep into the cab, making everything eerie and silent. My breath formed small frosty clouds in the cold air. Pulling out my phone, I hoped to get a signal, maybe call for a tow, or at least to let someone know that I was stuck. But the screen remained blank, unresponsive. It was dead like everything else. I sighed deeply, my breath visible in the frigid darkness. Slipping on my jacket, I climbed out of the truck, grabbing my flashlight and tools from the sleeper compartment. The fog was even thicker out here, dampening the sound of my footsteps as I walked around the vehicle. The world felt isolated, cut off. The only noise, the faint echo of my own heart pounding. I raised the engine cover and started inspecting the engine, looking for any signs of damage, but everything seemed in order. No leaks, no frayed wires, nothing. It was as if the truck had just given up. "Come on, you stubborn old thing," I whispered, fiddling with the wires and checking the connections, hoping to breathe some life back into it. I worked for a while, repeatedly trying to restart the truck, but it was in vain. No hum, no purr, just dead silence. The weight of isolation pressed further in on me, and the stories from the diner crept back into my mind. Here I was, alone in the middle of this haunted forest, with nothing but an unresponsive truck and a phone that wouldn't turn on. It was becoming increasingly clear that getting out of here would not be easy. The metallic chill of the truck door seeped through my shirt as I leaned against it. Silence and the fog enveloped me, punctuated only by my own breathing and the soft rustling of the leaves in the forest on either side of the road. "Well, Dell," I murmured to myself, trying to find comfort in my own voice, "you're in a right mess now." I considered climbing back into the truck, locking the doors and just waiting for dawn. It would be safer, wouldn't it? But I quickly discarded that thought. The blaring reminder of the clock ticking on my dashboard and my now impossible-to-meet deadline killed all thought of that. I mean, heck, even if the sunrise brought with it some salvation, the delays in getting the truck fixed would throw everything off. I would have to deal with missed deliveries, an angry client, and probably lost wages. Not to mention the likely damage to my reputation. My palms grew sweaty at the thought. Gazing down the fog-laden road, I tried to gauge how far I had driven since leaving the diner. My memory conjured the face of the waitress, her eyes filled with genuine concern. A pang of regret tugged at my heart. I should have heeded her warning. I should have heeded all of their warnings. I looked the other way. The road ahead was a mystery, a shrouded veil of fog and uncertainty. It could be miles before I hit another town, another human being, any civilization. The path behind me was known. It was a lesser devil of sorts. I had no idea which was shorter, and without my phone or the truck's GPS, there was no way of knowing. I weighed my choices, each bringing its own brand of dread, each holding the possibility that it was the shorter or longer route. Cursed road. I spat, my frustration evident. Why had I been so arrogant to dismiss all of those tales? The monster was obviously bogus, but the fog was real. I was now paying the price for my skepticism. With a deep exhale, I tried to shake off the growing unease, to make a clear-headed decision. Whatever I chose, standing still really wasn't an option. Then it struck me, oddly clearer than before, that the entirety of this road lacked any semblance of human touch, save for the asphalt under my boots. My gaze pierced the fog, hoping to see some distant glint of metal or glass, a sign of civilization. But it was just a blank void. A winding path lined with shadows providing no hint of life at all. I hadn't seen a sign or a building since I had turned onto this road. Not even an abandoned one. You've got to be kidding me, I whispered, letting out a sharp exhale that clouded the chill. Not a house, a barn, or even a shed. This road, a slice through nature, was itself the only proof that mankind had ever set foot here. If I decided to hoof it, which way should I go? Back the way I had come, or push forward, hoping that the other end of this shortcut was nearer? Night walks were nothing new to me. I had broken down more than once over the years. Several of them had happened at night. But this was different. The night, coupled with the oppressive fog and those twisted tales fresh in my mind. Well, come on, Dale, I muttered. Waiting for the sun felt like the smart move. But how long had I been on this road? Hours? It could have been minutes, but it felt like days. Logic said that I should wait for dawn. But logic and gut were in one heck of a disagreement. As I leaned against the cold, lifeless truck, looking at the impenetrable fog, searching for some hint of what to do, every second of indecision made the night grow heavier. The darkness, the silence, the unknown, it was becoming unbearable. All I knew was that something had to change, and fast. Pulling off my sweat-soaked hat, I ran a hand across my forehead. My fingers came away damp. I tilted my head upwards, seeking some solace in the sky. There was nothing. No moonlight, no stars. Just the unending black stitched together by the heavy tree canopy. The stillness was oppressive. But then, from the corner of my eye, something caught my attention. A faint light, threading its way through the tree line. It wasn't the soft silver of moonlight. No, this was different. It was an unnatural, eerie greenish hue. It danced in and out of focus through the fog. A house or a store. It had to be civilization. It must be, well, a building or something. But it seemed to move, but not very fast. It was probably just the fog playing a trick on my mind or something. I squinted, trying to get a better look, trying to decide. It could be help, I whispered, as if voicing the thought out loud might either solidify or shatter my hope. There wasn't really much choice. Stay with the dead truck in the pitch black, or walk for miles, or go see what help may lie at the light source. That last option seemed like it was at least worth a shot. Taking a deep breath, I started moving. With every step towards that greenish glow, the forest seemed to move around me. But determination coursed through my veins. That light, eerie as it was, offered a shred of hope in the darkness, and right now, I would cling to anything. The forest seemed to swallow me whole as I took those initial steps. The canopy above was an oppressive black sheet, barely allowing any remnant of the outside world to filter through. Every sound was muffled. My own footsteps, the distant call of some nocturnal creature, the rhythmic thud of my heart. The air, thick with fog, seemed to grip my throat, each breath tasting of cold dampness. My flashlight beam struggled in the fog, barely illuminating more than a couple of yards in front of me. But as I ventured deeper, even its weak beam began to falter, flickering like a dying star. "Come on, not now," I whispered, giving it a shake and praying for a few minutes more of light. Pausing for a moment, I risked a glance over my shoulder. The sight, or rather the lack of it, sent a cold shiver down my spine. The truck, my lifeline, I guess, was nowhere to be seen. The inky blackness and the fog had claimed it. But that couldn't be right. I hadn't walked that far. Had I? Looking ahead, the green light, though faint, still beckoned. It didn't seem any closer. Heck, it seemed even further away now. Panic surged through me, but with it came determination. I was already in too deep. There was no turning back now. I continued on at a more brisk pace, ready to get out of the woods. As I trudged on, that peculiar greenish glow remained ever elusive. An unsettling thought gnawed at me. The light seemed to dance away, always just out of reach. Every time that I thought that I had gained ground, it seemed to move further into the distance, teasing me, pulling me deeper into the abyss of the forest. Enough is enough, I thought, tightening my grip on the dying flashlight. The light might not even be a source of help, and something about it made me nervous. I decided to head back to the truck. I would get back in the cab, I would catch my breath, I'd gather my thoughts and figure out the best way to get out of this godforsaken place. With a deep breath to steady my nerves, I turned around, doing my best to trace my steps back, which was challenging between the darkness and the fog and the general lack of any trail. My boots crunched on the forest floor, and it felt like I was walking on a never-ending carpet of brittle bones. Every shadow seemed to move, mocking me as I tried to navigate this treacherous landscape. Minutes turned into what felt like hours. By my reckoning, I should have gotten back to the truck by now, or at least spotted the truck. This was definitely taking longer than it should have. But there was nothing. The inescapable blanket of fog made it impossible to discern any landmarks. Dang it, I muttered, frustration threatening to spill over. Think, Dale, think. Panic began its slow crawl up my spine. The forest had turned me around so much that I wasn't even sure which way was up anymore. Every direction seemed wrong. Every tree looked like the one before. The realization hit me hard. I was lost, truly lost. Then, like a siren call in the distance, the greenish light flickered into view again, beckoning me with its enigmatic glow. Taking a shaky breath, I whispered to myself, "All right, Dale. You're already lost. Might as well see what the light is." I moved towards it, less out of hope and more out of sheer desperation. The rhythmic thudding of my boots was all I could hear as I drew nearer to the elusive light. This time, oddly enough, it didn't seem to move away. As though it was now suddenly anchored in place, it stayed, a beacon in the consuming darkness. I was getting closer, yet a sudden shiver down my spine gave me pause. Every instinct screamed that I should run, but I pressed on, but now a little slower, quieter, with more caution. A ridge loomed ahead, the forest floor gradually ascending. It felt like the world itself was warning me, like nature was whispering caution into my ear. A silent debate raged in my head. I flipped off my flashlight. The shadows around me grew darker, deeper, but the green glow provided just enough light for me to continue. I decided to err on the side of caution. It's not like I had anything to lose by being careful, right? I slowed my steps even more and crouched and crept forward, almost crawling. Creeping up the incline, I did my best to avoid any dead leaves or twigs. My breaths came shallow and deliberate, as if the very act of breathing might give me away. I cautiously peered through the lattice of branches and underbrush. Beyond the ridge, the trees gave way to a small clearing. And right there, bathed in that unearthly greenish light, stood the heart of all the legends. The very subject of whispered tales, the Fog Walker. It was both majestic and terrifying. An otherworldly silhouette, its form seemed to blur and shift with the fog that surrounded it. Neither fully solid nor entirely ethereal. The Fog Walker appeared to be woven from the very mist it commanded. A cold dread settled in my guts. The stories were real. All of those warnings, the anxious glances exchanged among the locals, the dread in their voices, they weren't just stories. And I had walked right into the heart of the legend. A deep silence seemed to cover the clearing, punctuated only by the rapid beat of my heart. The Fog Walker didn't move. It just stood there, an ancient sentinel in its own domain. It seemed unaware of my presence, or maybe it simply didn't care. Either way, I dared not make a sound. I needed a plan, an escape route, something. But for that moment, hidden behind the curtain of underbrush, I was just a terrified spectator ensnared by the sight. Time seemed to hang in a fragile balance, each second stretching out unbearably long as I watched the Fog Walker. My mind screamed at me to move, to run, but my limbs felt like they were bound in heavy chains of ice-cold dread. Every instinct told me that staying put would be my end. The woods whispering warnings, the shadows cast by the moon seemed to lengthen and to beckon me away from the clearing. Stupid, stupid, stupid. I cursed myself under my breath. The words barely audible even to my own ears. I should have listened. I should have never come down this road. But recrimination wouldn't get me out of this. Action would. The greenish glow that had previously drawn me in now felt like a death trap. Shifting my weight slightly, I began to retreat, every movement calculated and painfully slow. Every move, the rustle of my clothes, the slight crunch of dirt beneath my boots, sounded louder than they should, and I prayed that the fog would dampen the sounds. My mind raced, a jumble of thoughts and regrets. The truck, I had to find it. I had to get to it. The images of the diner, the warnings, the path that I had chosen all played on a loop, tormenting me. I picked my way through the forest, trying to remember landmarks, but everything looked the same, blanketed by the fog and the darkness. I tried to shake off the oppressive feeling, reminding myself that I had faced many challenges on the road. This was just another one, albeit a horrifying, supernatural one. I didn't dare look back, fearing that I would see the Fog Walker pursuing me. I just had to keep moving, one step at a time, until I was out of the woods, back in my truck. Then I would get to safety. I would go back to the well-traveled roads and highways, where there were no shortcuts, no eerie tales, and no unexplainable phenomena. Then the moist ground beneath my feet betrayed me, sending me tumbling headfirst down the incline. Sticks and stones bit into my flesh as I rolled, the sharp foliage tearing at my clothes. My breath caught in my throat. I was gripped by raw panic. I slid and tumbled, crashing through the underbrush, the noise shattering the silence. I finally came to a stop, limbs tangled in the underbrush, my mouth tasting soil and blood. A deep breath wheezed out of me, and I gingerly started to pick myself up, grimacing against the pain. My heart pounded fiercely, each thud echoing the urgency of my situation. And then I noticed it. The ethereal glow was brighter, more consuming, creating sharp, otherworldly silhouettes around me. My gaze traveled upwards, and at the crest of the hill, illuminated by that sickly light, stood the fog walker. It was as if it were sculpted out of the fog itself, yet undeniably solid. It was just standing there, watching and waiting. Its form was almost humanoid, but something about it was fundamentally wrong. Distorted, twisted, unreal. I could feel its gaze on me. "No," I whispered to myself, my voice trembling with the weight of disbelief and horror. "No, no, 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 no." Adrenaline surged through me. Panic, raw and uncontrolled, drove me to my feet, and I bolted. The trees became blurred shapes in my peripheral vision. I was running blind, every step and turn dictated by sheer instinct. The woods seemed to close in, the canopy of leaves above a suffocating tapestry, blocking out any sight of the heavens. The ground was treacherous, roots reaching up like skeletal fingers to trip me. But the fear of what lay behind drove me faster, harder. Behind me, I thought I heard whispers, soft, sinister murmurs carried by the wind, or perhaps by the fog itself. It was as if the forest, the fog walker, the very night conspired against me, whispering threats and promises of a dark fate. I pushed those thoughts away, focused solely on escaping. I wouldn't let the legends be my end. I couldn't shake the feeling of being hunted, of being just one step away from the grasp of the fog walker. My boots slammed against the uneven forest floor, each heavy step echoing the chaotic rhythm of my heart. Panic, raw and pure, surged through me, erasing every rational thought. Breathlessness tightened my chest, but terror fueled my limbs, urging me to keep moving, to run from whatever was behind or perhaps around me. The fog seemed to mock me, thickening with every stride, suffocating the very air that I struggled to breathe. It reached out with ghostly fingers, stroking my face, dampening my shirt, blinding my vision. Every shadow seemed to dance and contort, playing tricks on my already compromised senses. A stick snapped somewhere to my left, or was it my right? Direction lost all meaning. The entire world had shrunk down to this endless, repetitive cycle. Run, breathe, dodge a tree, and keep running. I could hear my own ragged breathing, loud and desperate. Or was it something else breathing alongside me? Something close but unseen. I refused to let the thought fully form in my mind, but it hung there, insidious and unavoidable. "Dang it, Dale," I rasped to myself, each syllable tasting like regret. My voice felt alien, detached from the rest of me. Just dang that shortcut. The weight of the stories told back at the diner, the warnings that I had so arrogantly ignored, pressed down on my soul. I felt trapped not only by the forest but by my own pride. The choices that had led me here, the insistent disbelief, and the stupid deadline. It all felt so insignificant now. All I wanted was a way out. Suddenly, my foot caught on something, a hidden root or a sunken stone, and the ground rushed up to meet me. The impact knocked the wind out of me, but fear refused to let me stay down. Grunting with effort, I scrambled back up, not daring to glance behind. I pushed forward, and suddenly I broke into a clearing. The sight that met my eyes felt both out of place and undeniably eerie. The skeletal remains of a house. The structure was small, maybe 2 or 3 rooms at best. Its walls were crumbling, overtaken by ivy and time, with most of its roof caved in. Its windows were now just gaping holes that stared out like vacant eyes. But amidst the isolation of these cursed woods, it felt odd. It was the first sign of civilization I had seen since I started down this road. A sudden surge in the greenish glow from behind quickened my heartbeat. The fog walker was drawing near, the illumination of its presence becoming undeniably brighter, more menacing. My choices were slim: stand out in the open and face whatever was approaching, or seek shelter in the decaying relic before me. It wasn't a hard choice. I darted towards the ruins, my feet scrambling over the loose stones and fallen timbers. The front entrance, or what remained of it, was shrouded in darkness. Inside, the remnants of once cozy quarters greeted me. A rusted fireplace, long abandoned, promised no warmth. But to my left, a small nook beckoned. A collapsed section of the floor had created a cavity, a space just big enough to conceal a desperate man. Without hesitation, I squeezed into the niche, pulling bits of rotted wood and decayed cloth over me as makeshift camouflage. The ground beneath was cold, damp, and uncomfortable, but fear easily overshadowed any physical discomfort. The darkness was thick, nearly palpable, as I tried to regulate my ragged breathing. Every breath sounded too loud in the pressing silence. Each moment felt like an eternity as I lay in wait. Huddled in the dank recess, my heart hammered so violently that I was convinced that it would betray my location. The narrow slit between the rotted timbers allowed me a limited view of the clearing outside the ruins. The fog had thickened, if that was even possible, and suddenly a chilling presence wafted through the air. A subtle drop in temperature, an unexplainable shift. The fog walker. Its grotesque silhouette appeared in the haze, oddly fluid, composed of the fog itself. There were no discernible features, just a looming amorphous form that seemed to pulse with an unsettling energy. Its movements were deliberate, not hurried, making the menace all the more real. Frozen in place, I watched as it began to explore the ruins, circling the structure in a deliberate pattern. Its motion was disturbing, fluid, smooth, but yet forceful. It was as if the fog itself had grown limbs and was moving with intent. Every time it drew nearer to my hideaway, my breath hitched and I would pull further into the shadows. There was a moment, a horrifying, heart-stopping moment, when the fog walker paused right outside my makeshift hideout. The air grew colder, my ears filled with a strange, mournful sound, something between a whisper and a sigh. Was it searching? Could it sense me? My mind raced, formulating desperate plans, but My body refused to act, paralyzed by primal fear. Then, just as inexplicably as it had come, the fog walker moved away, its form dissolving into the mist, the oppressive feeling it exuded beginning to wane. The distant tree line became visible again, though the fog still lingered. I remained still for what felt like hours, each passing second a testament to my dumb luck or perhaps the entity's lack of perception. Even as the minutes ticked by and the immediacy of the danger seemed to wane, I couldn't shake off the weight of fear pressing down on me. Each creak of the rotting timbers, each whisper of the wind felt like a harbinger of a return, of that thing coming back. My hideaway in the ruins, a place that I had stumbled upon in sheer desperation, felt both like a sanctuary and a trap. I should move, I whispered to myself, testing the idea, tasting the fear that it brought. If I stayed put, I might be safe, but that thing would come back. I wished that I had never left the truck. I wished that I had never taken the shortcut. I should move, get back to the road and to the truck. But the nagging doubts crept in, snaking around my mind. What if that thing was out there, watching, waiting? It had been so close to me before, its otherworldly presence cold and undeniable. What would it do if it caught me? Would it drag me into the fog, making me a part of its sinister world? Or worse, would I simply vanish, leaving no trace, just another person lost to the legends of the highway? Maybe morning, I thought, trying to quell the rising panic. I'll wait until morning. Things always look better in the daylight. But a part of me scoffed at that. What if the daylight didn't drive the monster away? One of the locals had said that he thought it did, or at least implied it, I think, but who could be sure? Torn between the urge to flee and the paralyzing fear of what lurked in the forest, I settled deeper into my hiding spot, trying to slow my racing heart. I could feel the cold seeping into my bones, the dampness of the ground making itself felt through my clothes. Hours, or probably just minutes, seemed to blend into one another as the terror kept me pinned. But slowly, the need to act, to move, overcame the paralysis. My truck was out there. I had to get back to it. But which way? The fog, the dense woods, the ever-present darkness had disorientated me. Taking a deep breath, I pushed myself up, poking my head out from the hiding spot. I crept to the door of the ruined house. The moon hung high and pale, casting a silvery sheen over the clearing. It wasn't much light, but it was just barely enough for me to see. I fumbled in my pocket, my fingers brushing against the cold metal of my flashlight. I was glad that I still had it, and I hoped that it would still work. But I was scared to use it. A beacon in this sea of murk might just call the monster back to me. My eyes adjusted and I scanned the clearing. There was no sign of that peculiar greenish light that had led me deeper into this hell. That was a relief, but it left me with yet another dilemma. Which direction was the road? My gut told me to move opposite to where I had last seen that thing disappear, and it was as good a guess as any. Creeping out of my hiding spot, I clung to the shadows, using the trees as both guide and shelter. Each rustling leaf, every snapping twig underfoot seemed to scream out my presence. I held my breath, pausing every few steps, straining to hear over my pounding heart. There were times that I thought I caught the faintest echo of movement. That whispering sigh that seemed to emanate from the fog walker. but nothing materialized. There was no looming silhouette, no chilling presence. It was just me and the forest and the fog. And yet, with every step, the weight of the unknown, the fear of what might be lurking just beyond my field of vision pressed on me. I moved forward, praying that with every step I was drawing closer to my truck. The woods seemed endless, an ever-twisting labyrinth of trees and darkness. Time lost all meaning. It felt like days had passed, but the position of the moon, occasionally glimpsed through the canopy of the forest, suggested otherwise. Even so, my body felt weighted down by fatigue, and every muscle screamed in protest with every step. In the quiet of the night, I could almost hear my thoughts racing, punctuated by the thud of my heart in my chest. Had I made the right call? The trees all looked the same. They were all eerily familiar. I could have been going in circles for all I knew. And then, as if answering my paranoia, a soft green glow would pierce the veil of the night, a ghostly harbinger of the thing, the fog walker, signaling that it was nearby. It was almost hypnotic, and a part of me wanted to approach it, like I was being drawn to its embrace. But then the part of my brain that's kept humans alive for eons would kick into gear, drowning out the fear, pressing it down, driving me to hide, to survive. Each time I saw the light, I would plunge into the nearest thicket, pressing myself to the ground. The bristles of the underbrush would scratch against my face, and the dampness of the earth would seep through my clothes. But all of that was secondary. What mattered was being unseen, undetected. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the glow would fade, and the woods would plunge back into darkness. It's leaving, I would think. Or maybe it's just waiting, lurking, watching. Drawing in a ragged breath, I would muster the strength to press forward. The haunting image of the glow burned into my retinas. I had no idea how many times this sequence repeated itself. Each time felt like a small eternity. At the core of my thoughts, beneath the adrenaline and fear, a mantra repeated itself. Just make it to the truck. Just make it to the truck. It was the one thread tying me to sanity in this mad world. And so I pressed on, desperate to escape the clutches of the fog walker's forest. I continued on, I think for hours. Likely I was going in circles. The repeated cycle of hide and go, of green glows and enveloping darkness. It was starting to wear on my sanity. At every rustle of the wind, every creak of a branch, my heart would race a mile a minute, thinking, "This is it. The fog walker has found me." But as time wore on, even that constant dread began to give way to an exhausted numbness. I was being whittled down, inch by inch, by this forest and its relentless pursuer. The hours bled together. Just when it felt like hope was a distant memory, a sliver of clarity broke through the canopy. The unmistakable shimmer of moonlight on asphalt. The road. Stumbling from the underbrush, the solidity of the road under my feet felt like a warm embrace. It was the touch of the familiar in a night fraught with the unknown. But as the relief washed over me, a new challenge presented itself. Which way? I had no idea which direction my truck was. My exhausted mind struggled to recall any landmark, any sign to guide me. But there hadn't been any on the road. I took a moment. I closed my eyes and I listened to the deep silence of the forest. It wasn't an informed decision. again, it was more just a gut feeling. I turned right, heading down the lonely stretch of road, hoping against hope that I was moving towards safety and away from the horrors of the woods. As I started down the path, an old saying my pa used to tell me floated into my mind. Sometimes in life, Dale, you gotta make a choice, even if it's blind. Just remember, it's not the direction you choose that defines you, but how you tread the path. I clung to those words, drawing strength from them as I walked. After about 5 minutes, I think, in the muted glow of the moonlight, I could see the outline of my truck up ahead. That silhouette, a sign of both hope and normalcy, seemed out of place after the distorted horrors that I had faced. Thank God, I whispered under my breath, my pace quickening. But as I neared, an unnerving sense of dread washed over me. The closer I got, the colder the night seemed to become, as if the woods, having played their part, now stood back to let the main act take center stage. I reached for the truck's door, the cold metal handle biting into my palm. I climbed in, the old leather seat creaking under my weight. The locks clicked into place, a tiny, almost laughable defense against what lurked out there. I sat there for a minute, then I tried turning the key in the ignition. The engine remained silent. Of course. I tried again, a rising desperation edging each turn. But the only response was the echo of my own futile attempts. "Come on, you piece of junk," I muttered. But deep down, I knew that it wouldn't start. I had just hoped that for some reason it might have worked. I leaned back, ready to cry, not a feeling that I was used to. I looked out at the road and the forest, wondering what I should do. And that's when I saw it. That eerie glow, like a beacon in the thick, enveloping fog, signaling my impending doom. It was drawing closer. The instinct to run was there, gnawing at my insides, but where could I go? The woods had proven no sanctuary. And so, with no options left, I clambered out of the driver's seat and hid behind it. I sunk down and peered out into the forest. Maybe it would go away. But the soft glow grew brighter, casting long, stretching shadows as it drew near. My breath grew shallow, my eyes fixed on the mesmerizing light. Even inside the cab, I felt an oppressive chill. The coldness of the impending confrontation. The culmination of a nightmarish journey. Everything had led to this, and I was trapped like a rat, waiting for the predator to pounce. I slipped deeper into the shadows of the cab. I needed to hide. The darkness of the sleeper cab offered a place where maybe, just maybe, it wouldn't find me. With a swift motion, I tugged the curtains separating the driver's seat from the sleeper area, and I hoped that it was enough to cloak my presence. I moved and I hid under the bed. I realized after I jammed myself under the bed that I had left the curtain open. So I pulled down the blanket and covered the gap between the floor and the bed. There I was, a grown man hiding under his blanket, hoping that the monsters would go away. Every ounce of my being told me to remain hidden, to keep my eyes shut and pray for daybreak. But a chilling curiosity gnawed at my edges. I pulled the blanket down just a bit to allow one eye to see out. The glow, it intensified with each passing second, painting the cab a ghostly green tint. I could almost feel it pulsing, alive. I pressed my body deeper into the crevice under the bed. Memories of the diner came flooding back, the hushed tones, the unease of the locals, and their forewarnings. Here, I understood them. Here, in the heart of darkness, I felt the true weight of their words. I inwardly cursed, regretting my stubbornness. I should have listened. I heard it then. The subtle grind of metal as if something was testing the door handle. Then came the forceful shove against the truck, causing the entire rig to lurch to the side. My heart threatened to break free from its cage, each beat echoing loudly in my ears. It moved. I heard its footfalls around the truck, a dragging, raspy sound that sent shivers up my spine. The sensation of being trapped, like a rabbit in a snare, was suffocating. It won't get in. It won't get in, I repeated to myself, a desperate mantra in the midst of my rising panic. But then, the roof creaked under a new weight. The entity, the fog walker, had made its way on top of the truck. It seemed to shamble around on the roof for a few minutes before finally descending. Then there was silence for just a moment before a tap, tap, tap. My breath caught in my throat. The sound was clear. The beast was tapping at the thick glass of the window. It was as if the creature was toying with me, reveling in the fear that it instilled. Images of the old ruined house flitted through my mind. I wished to be anywhere but here, even back in that crumbling shelter. The consistent tapping was maddening, an auditory torture that reminded me of just how vulnerable and alone I was. Then it stopped. In the hollow silence that followed, the weight of my decision to venture this cursed path pressed down on me. Here I was, cornered by an entity of, lore, in the middle of nowhere. It was the most terrifying thing that I had ever experienced. Closing my eyes, I willed the nightmare to end. Every creak of the truck, every soft gust of wind outside only magnified my dread. The silence dragged on. Maybe it had gone away finally. I started to hope that that was the case. Then, suddenly, the jostling started up again. More urgent, more desperate. It wasn't trying the cab anymore. The sound had migrated to the back, to the trailer. A dull thud echoed as the entire truck vibrated from the force exerted on the trailer's metallic exterior. The echoes of twisted metal and violent shaking filled the otherwise silent night. What could it possibly want back there? I had from time to time thought that it knew where I was, but now I wasn't so sure. I forced a breath through gritted teeth, each inhale and exhale measured, trying to not let the rising tide of panic consume me. Hold on, Dale. Just hold on. Eventually, the onslaught on the trailer ceased. The thick silence was nearly as oppressive as the commotion. It was equally as horrifying. My heart raced, waiting, listening, anticipating the next move of the unseen tormentor. But it didn't come. After a long time, I began to wonder if it had truly gone away this time. Or maybe it was just waiting for me to move from hiding. There was, really, only one way to know. Peering out from under the blanket, I searched for the greenish hue. But there was nothing, just the opaque, ever-present fog. The light was gone, vanished as if it had never even been there. It was gone. I was safe. Hope briefly dawned in me, but the fear, raw and primal, pulled me back into its grip. The quiet was too sudden, too unnerving. I wasn't about to fall for it. I pulled back and settled under the blanket once more. Every instinct screamed at me to stay hidden, to just wait it out. And so, in the silence of that haunted forest, with the lingering dread of the fog walker's presence, I waited. I remained cocooned in the dim confines of the sleeper cab, letting the muted dawn light filter in. Hours felt like days as the stifling weight of anticipation pressed down on me. Outside, the encompassing darkness gradually receded, replaced by the soft, hesitant embrace of day. Finally, I worked up the courage to move out of hiding. My legs felt like they were made of lead, muscles aching, bones groaning. A part of me wondered if the creature, the fog walker, proud in the daylight, did it sulk on the fringes of the woods, watching, waiting for the opportune moment? Or did the sunlight banish it? One of the stories had seemed to indicate that, but then again, that guy had said that he just fled the forest, and that seemed like the thing to do. I crawled from the rear of the cab, each movement deliberate, every sound amplified in my heightened state of alertness. The driver's seat felt both foreign and familiar underneath me. I took a deep breath, trying to steady the frantic beating of my heart. The vast expanse of forest, though bathed in morning light, still held an eerie, expectant silence. Should I risk it, walk the miles, or should I wait for someone? If anyone ever comes down this god-forsaken road, I whispered, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. The keys still dangled from the ignition. An impulse, illogical yet irresistible, surged through me. The key felt cold in my hand, and I hesitated, half expecting the monstrosity to pounce from the shadows. I turned the key, and the engine rumbled to life. The sound was so loud, so real in that vast silence, that it felt like a miracle. I threw the truck into drive, and pressing the gas pedal with a renewed urgency, I muttered a breathless prayer. The road stretched before me, and as I drove, the forest, once dense, began to thin, allowing fragmented rays of sunlight to pierce the canopy. The engine's steady hum was the only sound. Just a little further, I told myself, glancing occasionally at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see that eerie green light or the shape of the creature emerging from the forest in a blanket of fog. But with each passing minute, the dense woods receded into the distance, becoming nothing more than a dark, haunting silhouette in my rearview mirror. As the forest's oppressive weight lifted, the familiar sights of civilization slowly came into view. Buildings, cars, people. They had all seemed so mundane, so unremarkable just yesterday. But in that moment, they were the best thing that I had ever seen. By the time I rolled into the delivery yard, the sun was high and my tardiness was glaringly evident. The receiving manager, a stout man with a clipboard, looked up, annoyance evident on his face. But I couldn't care less about his mood or the missed deadline. "Late, aren't you?" he grumbled. I just nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you," I whispered, more to myself than to him. As I unloaded, the weight on my shoulders felt lighter than it had in hours. When I finished up, I decided that I better get the truck checked out, so I made my way to a local auto shop. I had used the place before when I had come to this town. Since I had left the forest, the truck hadn't given me a single problem, but I didn't want to risk it. And I needed someone to tell me that there was a tangible reason for the truck's malfunction, some kind of technical fault or a loose wire. Anything that would tether the night's events back to reality at least a bit. But after Sam, the mechanic, spent nearly an hour going over the beast, he emerged with a puzzled expression. "Dale," he started, wiping the grease off his hands. "She's in pristine condition. There is not a thing wrong with it." His words hit me hard. Then what had caused the truck to die? Was it the fog? The forest? I have no idea, not even to this day. Whatever it wasn't mechanical. The truck hasn't given me a single problem since then. I made a silent vow to myself that I would never take a shortcut again, that I would stick to the interstates and the main roads, ones that were well-traveled and safe. Because what I had learned was that some shortcuts in life, well, they just aren't worth the gamble. Not when the stakes are your sanity or worse.